All right, so this is video 2 in the ad redesign series, and there are going to be some things I don't go into as much detail about here because I have covered them in video 1. I do suggest you go back and watch all of video 1 so that you are you have all the information that you need, and also because it's helpful. So we'll jump in here. One of the things I talk about in video 1 is the size of the text. So that would apply here as well. You want to make sure that you're not designing for a poster, but you're designing for a magazine, which means a lot of this text in the middle especially can be smaller. I like how you have these illustrated elements. I think that they're nice and they're working well for you, which is good. But the color is throwing me off a little bit. So we have this says, hey, this is really important by size and by color. And then we also have this by color, and it's not nearly as important as this information, and it kind of steals the show from the other information around. So for visual hierarchy's sake, I would suggest keeping that the same color as this, which appears to be maybe like a nice dark green on my screen. And then consider the alignment that you have, because right now what our eye wants to do is actually travel between these areas. There's this nice space here, some breathing room for our eye. So rather than stopping at the text, like I get to here, and then my eye's like, oh, the end of this line takes me down here. So I think clean that up. I will say this typeface is right on the edge of a slab serif. Like it's got some pretty chunky serifs and some good details. So as it gets smaller, it gets harder to read. It might be better to find a different typeface, and this gets really tough to read at this size. So I would say simplify your typeface for readability because you do have a lot of text in here. Okay, so you have found the margin that I talked about in video 1, but your background actually should extend past the margins if you want it to appear to be the entire page. The only thing we have to worry about with the margin is text or things like that. I see that you have added a little bit of, is it beveling or gradient maybe? It's right on the edge of what I would recommend as far as good practices. So I would soften that effect a little bit if you feel really strongly about it needing to be there. I think it could also stand on its own because of the other great imagery and things like that that you have. Text size is looking really good. This color is only repeated one other place, and this is pretty not like super important information. Like it's actionable information and it's helpful to have in there, but I don't know if it warrants being the only thing in this color. And then alignment wise, I would move that over to this side just to kind of keep things nice and clean. I don't think it'll be an issue. You could also make it one long line instead of having two separate ones. So make sure you have all the same text that's in the original ad to help with that. And I think you're onto some good things with the pictures, especially really helpful. If this is supposed to be read at the same time as Havasu, I would also move it up for proximity's sake. Okay, so another like sweet illustration. This one is more polished than my concerns about number 1. We'll say this typeface is pretty tough to read at this size. It's because it's like a more decorative typeface. So I would suggest actually finding a different typeface for this. It's more sans serif typeface. It's not going to have as much character that you have like really well established between the colors and the shapes and the imagery. This guy borders a little bit on clip art, as do these. So I think it's like right on the edge. I wouldn't look at it and be like automatically you shouldn't make that choice, but I would say if you have time to look for more for different, more polished perhaps illustrations, that might help with that there. Proximity wise, all these things look like they're supposed to be together, but you have them with so much space between them. It's really hard for me to understand. Am I looking at one group of information? And then they're like not center aligned, but are center aligned. So it's a little bit tricky there. So I think a few things to clean up would help. You also have a lot of different colors going on, so perhaps simplifying the color palette as well. yeah, the alignment I think is the big challenge right now, because we have things that are like, these appear to be center aligned. This is not center aligned. It does use a script typeface at a smaller size, which can be harder to read. And then these guys being kind of center aligned, but appearing not to be because of this indent and stuff, is a little bit confusing. All right. Same thing. I'm not going to go over this again, but the same thing in this ad applies to here. So make sure you watch their critique. And I think at this point, one of the challenges this is facing is that it actually lacks contrast. So it's hard to read this text to me because of the color. And then the same actually as I talked about here with this information at the top, so go back and watch that one, applies to your information down here. I'm not sure if you want me to read each of these. Like right now I'm reading them each as their own columns because these lines strictly cut off each column. Or if you want me to read across the columns, in which case you need to do some adjusting there. Font size does seem to be appropriate as far as this goes. This little guy is kind of often left field here, so it needs to be incorporated into this area if it's supposed to go with that. You can change the year. I'm okay with that, by the way, so that it looks more current for you. But this is, I don't know that this is like the most important information. It's pretty important, but right now it's kind of combating this for the most important information. So some things that I think will continue to help. This text at this size is tough to read in this typeface, so you may need to switch it up and move it to a different version of that. And remember, like visual hierarchy wise, where to RSVP is usually the least important information. I wouldn't incorporate these lines here. They end up being a little bit of decoration for decoration's sake, and I don't think you need that there.